Vermont, June 6th. Upper Cold River Road north to the Plank Bridge. We had a hard time finding the trail off of Upper Cold River Road, a dirt road. We had just been here in June 2006, but surprise, we had forgot where the trail was. Dave said that he remembered a brook near the trail, and I remembered that there was a parking area on a hill. We drove back and forth on the road about 4 times, and I was checking the map to try and find where the AT crossed the road. We finally found the trail, however, it was all grown in at the road, which is why we had such a hard time finding it. There was no road sign for the AT on this road. There were lots of wildflowers here. Daisies and tall buttercup lined the road. When we finally got onto the trail, the woods became less grown in, and we entered a nice pine forest. The trail was pretty in here in the hemlock forest, and it followed the brook. We came out to a road and saw a handmade sign that was under a small rock for a private shelter that was about 5 miles on the road ahead of us. We reached Clement Shelter Road, another dirt road, and walked the road over a nice wooden bridge, and then went back into the woods on the other side of the brook. It was a beautiful day with low humidity, a nice breeze, and temperatures around 75 degrees. The trail passed by an old foundation in the pine forest that might have been a farmhouse with an old stone wall, so it looked like this trail could have been an old farm road at one time. We crossed another bridge, and I thought that it was a nice place to eat our lunch, but I wanted to make it to the shelter. We crossed a 4-wheel drive road and heard a vehicle nearby. We could see the Governor Clement Shelter through the woods, and we saw a red Jeep driving around in circles in front of the shelter, so we decided to go back and eat at the bridge. After we finished our lunch, we went back to the shelter. The shelter was an old stone lean-to with a stone fireplace inside. Someone had ripped up the bunk beds to use as firewood. There was trash everywhere inside and around the lean-to. I found a half-full bag of chocolate chip cookies on a shelf inside the lean-to. I was debating if we should take it out of here, not because we like cookies, we don't really, but because it attracts mice and bears to the shelter. We decided to leave it. Maybe a thru-hiker might eat them. We found no logbook here. Someone had been here recently as there was still hot coals in the fire pit in front of the shelter. There had been a large bonfire, and it was still smoking. I had read books written by other hikers, and there had been a lot of comments how this is not a good place to stay the night at, as it has a dirt road that comes right to the shelter. Some had written that it is a party area for the local youths. This is a very pretty area, and someone should come out here and clean up this place, because if the road was not here, there would be a lot of level areas around here for lots of campsites. After leaving the shelter, the trail went up a dirt 4-wheel and cross-country ski road. It had climbed steadily after leaving the shelter. We saw the guy with the red Jeep, and he was sitting in the Jeep off the side of the road near the stream. We wanted to make a mile from the shelter so that we could make it to where we were when we had come down from the gondola on top of Killington Peak in 2006. We left the road and entered the woods through a muddy path in the hardwoods. This is why thru-hikers call Vermont Vermud. We reached a wet area with a wooden plank board walk over the trail, and we had to turn around here as we are out of time. We will have to come down from the top to this area another day. We had met a couple of hikers with big backpacks coming southbound and asked them if they were southbounders. They told us that they were. However, we thought that they had looked too clean to be through hikers. Maybe they were section hikers. We told them about the cookies at the shelter. They seemed interested. However, when we had got back to the shelter, the cookies were not touched. On our way down to the shelter, we met a male thru-hiker heading north. An older man with a tan face and sweating a lot with sweat pouring down his face. He asked us if we had come down from the summit. We told him that we did not make it to the summit and that we were heading back to our car. He looked disappointed. However, he wished us a good hike, and we wished him good luck on his hike. We had seen the biggest toad that I have ever seen. It was as big as my hand. It was getting a little cloudy in the distance, and I was worried that it might start to rain, so we moved a little more quickly to get back to our car. We had seen a newt, a chipmunk, butterflies, bunchberries, tall buttercups, daisies, and maybe some wild raspberry brush. We heard a red squirrel and some birds. June 7th, River Road north to Quimby Mountain. Today was more humid than yesterday was. It had rained heavily last night while we were in the bear cabin at Gifford Woods State Campground. This morning, the air felt heavy. Yesterday had been cooler and less humid. We parked on River Road in the town of Killington. We had picked the worst day to do this section. The trail started with a steep, hard climb up with no views up during the climb. I was just crawling up the mountain, and Dave had kept stopping and looking back at me and asking me if I was all right. I had bugs swarming all over me. I was covered in sweat. Everything was sticking to me, and this climb was terrible. Of course, I was not all right. The woods here was mostly hardwoods with lots of birch trees. The trail book said that there was a viewpoint at a bend in the trail. However, it was all grown in. We were dying as we climbed up 2,000 feet in only a half a mile with no views. And when we reached the top, there was just trees, no views, so we just descended through a power line. This was the most exciting part of this hike, with some orange hawkweed, some berry bushes, and finally some views of the Killington ski area. The trail then climbed back up to another top with no views, and then descended again to another ATV road just as 2 ATVs went through. We had just made it across the road and back into the woods before they went by us. We climbed again, then descended, then climbed, and etc. We had finally reached our turnaround point, but we wanted to make it to Stony Brook Shelter. However, we just couldn't descend from here just to turn around and go back up it. We were just too wiped out. We stopped about a mile from the shelter, just before we descended again, and Dave carved a symbol of the AT into a dead tree at the top of the hill, so that we would know where we had turned around when we came up from the other side. He never carves into a live tree. We saw a male thru-hiker while we were eating our lunch on a log that was over the trail. I had thought that he was a bear because we had not seen any other hikers on the trail today. He asked us how far it was to the shelter and that his feet hurt. We told him that it was about a mile from here. We had both heard something running across the trail. I saw something brown and small, but was unable to get a good enough look at it to see what it was. I thought that it could have been a squirrel, but Dave said that he had thought that it had looked like it could have been a fox. We headed back and met 3 more thru-hikers heading north. One of them asked us how far it was to the shelter. The hiking book mentioned that this section of the trail is very secluded because not many day hikers really hike in this area. I can see why, because it is not a very scenic section to do. I would rate this section on the fun meter as a D. Too steep with no views, pines, lake, streams, and no bridges, just hard climbing. We were getting very tired and sore, our feet hurt, and Dave was getting grumpy. However, he did see a gardener snake as he was in the lead, so I did not see it. We heard some songbirds and seen some chipmunks on the trail today. All of the trails are beautiful in its own way, but on today's hike, the heat and the humidity just did us in. June 8th, Stony Brook Road south to Quincy Mountain. We drove out to Stony Brook Road, a dirt road. It was a 20-mile drive from base camp. We are moving further away from Gifford Woods State Park. We had trouble finding the trail because we didn't know where the AT crossed the road, or if this road was even passable by car to the trail. We reached a gate and had to walk about 5 miles up a steep hill in the sun in 90-degree humid temperatures to where the trail crossed the road. Dave said, and I quote, "If it doesn't meet the AT at the top of this mountain, then we are turning around." I checked my AT map and told him that the trail crossed the stream next to this road, but now we were moving away from the stream. I realized that we must have drove past the trail and did not see it, so we turned around and headed back down to the car. When we were driving back down the hill, we saw some wild turkeys running down the road in front of us. We finally saw a white blaze on a tree. We did not see this blaze when we came up the road. This is another example of the difficulty of doing the AT this way, because it can be difficult finding the trail, which takes time away from our hike. It was 11 by the time we got onto the trail, and it was sunny, hot, and humid, with the temperature now way over 90 degrees. Even the birds were not out singing in this temperature. The air was still, not even a touch of a breeze. The trail climbed through a beautiful hemlock forest with some views of the surrounding mountains and of the valley below. We reached a ladder that we used to climb up a steep, flat boulder and saw a small view from the top of this boulder. We said how beautiful it was on this section of the Quincy Mountain. We reached a beautiful rocky area with a stream in it. The hiking book mentioned this area as the spa. The water was flowing down the rocks into a small pool. I took off my boots and socks and soaked my hot, aching feet in the nice cold water. Dave wet his bandana and had wet the top of his head, but later he took off his boots and socks and soaked his feet too. It was 90 degrees with high humidity. However, the ice-cold water made us feel cooler. It was a magical area. We reached the Stony Brook shelter, a newer wood lean-to that was not made with tree logs, built in 1990. It was clean with no bunk beds, but had enough floor space for about 10 hikers to sleep in. A through hiker came by, the one that we had seen on Sunday, and he had told us that he was moving very fast on the trail and was hoping to finish the AT in August. He told us about some ice cream that he had in town. We headed back out onto the trail because we still needed to meet where we turned around yesterday, where Dave had carved the AT symbol on the dead tree. The AT sign said that it was 0.9 of a mile to the height of land. We were dying from the heat and the humidity, and on some of the trail, we were in the sun, which made it feel even hotter out here. However, we just kept trudging on. We reached a top with some white birch trees and then descended again. We were not supposed to be descending here, and we did not know how much further we had left to go. We passed a young male through hiker heading north, and he asked us how much further it was to the shelter and the water. We told him that it was not too far from here. We kept climbing up with Dave in the lead and me climbing slowly up when Dave suddenly yelled out, "I think that it is near." And then shortly after, he saw the dead tree and yelled back to me that we had made it. We were so happy that we made it to the turnaround point. We turned around and headed back to the spa to soak our feet again before heading back to the car. On the way out, we had seen some chipmunks, a woodpecker, and a garter snake in some leaves. We had plenty of gnats and flies, and there were lots of butterflies on the trail, and we had heard some songbirds after 3. On the road on the way out, we saw a big owl flying across the road. June 9th, Shadowgate Road north to the Lookout Cabin. We had a really hard time finding Shadowgate Road. It was supposed to come off of Route 107, but we could not find it. We finally found the road off of Route 12, and it was a logging road, and work was being done on the road to widen it. Dave said that the next time we come out here, it will probably be full of houses. We did not know where the trail crossed this road, and it seemed as if we had driven a very long way on this road back and forth to find the trail. But finally we saw a small AT sign on a tree with a small grass pull-off area, just as a through hiker emerged from the trail, not looking very happy. We started out north on the trail, and the trail was pleasant, going over 2 small brooks and into a nice pine grove, and I saw my first jack in the pulpit. The trail began, it's climbed, but being in the pines, it helped to ease the difficulty of the climb as it felt much more cooler being in the pine than being in the hardwoods. We reached Lakota Lookout, which was supposed to have great views of Lakota Lake and the White Mountains. However, it was so hot and hazy out that we could not see the mountains, and the lake was in the haze, so we did not bother to stop because the sun was just beating down on us here. We descended steeply down from the view. I had picked this section today because I did not think that it would be too steep, but this descent was. The problem with doing day hikes like this is that you have to return the same way that you came in from. So we were bummed about this because we knew that we would have to climb back up this in the heat and the humidity with the temperatures over 90 degrees. We stopped and I checked the map to see how many PUDs that we had to do before we reached the cabin. The elevation profile on these maps are very deceiving because it looks like the trail is fairly flat with little ups and downs, but it is not, as the ups and downs are more steeper than they are shown on the map profile. The air was still in the woods, and we were covered in so much sweat that it soaked our clothing, making them stick to our skin. We were just dying out here for just a little cool breeze to blow over us. Sometimes we would feel a light breeze. However, it was a hot breeze. It was forecasted today for a 40% chance of a thunderstorm. I kept hoping for one to cool us off, but no, the sun would just go into some clouds and then just pop back out. A woodpecker would break the silence of the woods, and once in a while a songbird would sing a melody, but it was just too hot for even them to be out. Dave had slipped off a slanted boulder while he was standing on it, clearing some overgrown brush from the trail. He was in the lead when he spotted an AT sign. This was very exciting because it meant that we were close to our destination for today. The sign said that we were 0.1 of a mile from the lookout cabin. We climbed up a steep hill and found a small cabin. There was an observation platform on top of the roof and a ladder going up to it on the outside of the cabin. This was a private cabin, and the owner allowed hikers to stay here at night in the cabin. The cabin was not in good shape and was in need of some repairs. The steps going up to the observation platform had broken handrailing, and on one side the handrailing was missing. It felt very scary being on top of the peak of the roof, overlooking the distant mountains. We found a thru hiker sitting on the porch with his gear spread out. He looked very disappointed at seeing us and probably was wishing that we would leave. We spoke with him for a while. He told us that he was out of food, even though he had just come from Killington Peak and the inn at the Long Trail, where he told us that he had a beer. It seemed like he could have walked to the town to get some food supply. He also said that he was out of water. Seems like he could have filled up at the inn or even the campground. He told us that no hiker would pay to stay at Gifford Woods Campground. However, we had seen thru hikers in some of the campsites. He finally packed up and walked away. My hiking book said that this cabin was locked, but hikers were allowed to sleep on the porch. But we found it unlocked and went inside to look around. There was a large fireplace inside for hikers to use on cold nights. It looked like at one time the owner used the cabin, but now it looked unused. A lot of the roofing shingles were missing from the roof and was all over the ground. There was also a large hole in the roof. It looked like it had been abandoned for a couple of years. I loved the cabin and the views. However, the observation platform looked dangerous, and unfortunately, it looked like the cabin might cave in the near future. They really should donate this cabin to the Green Mountain Club, the GMC, so that they could repair it for thru hikers to stay at. We headed back, and it was still very hot and humid out. The Lakota Lookout was still in the haze, so we did not stop. We did stop at a brook, and I soaked my hot feet in the cool water. Dave just soaked his bandana in the water and used it to cool off his head. We had seen no wildlife on the trail today. However, we had a turtle in the middle of the dirt road when we had drove in. I had to help it move off the road. We had seen some moose duds and tracks on the trail. We heard the woodpecker and songbird. The highlight of today's hike was the cabin and the Jack in the Pulpit. The low point of today's hike, the heat, the humidity, the climb, and Dave falling. June 10th, Stony Brook Road north to Shadowgay Road. First bear sighting on the trail. We parked on Stony Brook Road where we had parked before. Today we are going north on the trail. We did not want to do this section because it was supposed to be another hard climb and then more PUDs, followed by a steep descent to Shadowgay Road. Well, it turned out not to be that bad. We started out in a pine forest and we had a nice breeze today, even though it was still hot and humid out here. We reached a large pine tree that was recently blown apart, most likely by lightning during the thunderstorm last night. Dave thought that maybe it was hit by a hurricane or a twister, as there were other trees in the area down. You could even smell the scent of fresh pine in the air. We saw a snail on the trail, and Dave moved it off the trail. The hiking book said that we descend steeply via a switch back and then ascend gradually, then pass some knolls, and then the trail goes flat through an area of large ferns before passing a small pond before reaching a sag and the Continental Divide. Well, there was no switchback, and the ascent was very steep. The knolls were PUDs. The large fern area was in the hot sun with no shade, and we saw no pond. We did not know where the Sag and the Continental Divide was because it all just blended in with the PUDs, so we just took a guess to where the Continental Divide was. We descended again and passed a torn-up logging area with a couple of small streams that were not really flowing. The logging area was ugly, and we could hear logging equipment moving around. I could feel the pain of the trees being cut down. I really hate logging, especially this close to hiking trails. It is not the way that I want to see the AT. The trail climbed again steeply, and I was beginning to fear that we might not make it to our destination as it was really, really hot out here and I was getting overheated. We started to descend again, and my hopes was up that we might just make it, and we did. We saw where we had parked our car yesterday and was wishing that it was there so that we would not have to hike back, but no such luck. Unlike through hikers or section hikers, we always have to redo a section back the way we came. So we have to always go both north and south on the trail to complete a section of the trail. We ate our lunch near the stream by Shadowgay Road, and I took off my boots and soaked my feet in the nice cold water. Dave, of course, just wet his head with his bandana. He just does not like to take off his boots. Go figure. I accidentally dropped my sandwich in the water and had to throw it into the woods because it was too soaked and falling apart. I hope at this time of the day that there was not a bear nearby. I soaked my shirt in the water and put it back on. It was very refreshing, and we headed back to the car. On our way back, we stopped at the logging area at a stream to eat a snack, when Dave said that he heard something and turned to see something black running up the hill. It was a bear. It was quite an experience to see a black bear while hiking in the woods. We had covered a lot of miles on the AT and lots of miles on other trails, even in Yellowstone, and had never seen a black bear. Not even in New Jersey, where hikers report having several sightings of black bears. But we see one in Vermont. We passed 3 through hikers and we told them about our bear sighting. They told us that they had seen one back in Virginia. Later, we passed another male through hiker who noticed my knee braces. He said that he needed a pair of those because his knees were bothering him. We reached the car and have now finished this section of Vermont. I will miss Stony Brook Road. It was a beautiful dirt road with lots of old farm barns and camps. We had seen a garter snakes, a beaver, and a snail, and of course our first black bear. We heard some songbirds, a screeching bird sound. The high points of today's hike: the bear, low point of the hike, the heat, humidity, the steep climbs, and losing my sandwich. June 11th, Perkins Road north to Wintry Shelter. We just have to redo this piece because we did not have time to get all the way to the Lookout Cabin the last time we did this section. We had to find Lookout Farm Road, which we did find when we got to the beginning of the road and found out that the name was changed to Perkins Road. We had drove all the way to a logging road until we could not drive any further, but we did not see any sign of the AT. The AT guidebook said that the AT crossed Lookout Farm Road. We tried to find Old Town Road, which is where the AT is supposed to cross, and we had driven miles on a dirt road to a dead end and found no signs of the AT. We turned around and drove for about 2 hours trying to find Lookout Farm Road and was about to give up when we found a street sign for Perkins Road. Now, the AT map and book does not list this road. However, we had met a farmer and Dave asked him if he knew where Old Town Road was. He told us that all the roads in this area was called Old Town Road. He told us that if we walked to the end of this road, Perkins Road, that we would reach a 4-wheel road that the AT crossed over. We went to the end of the road and walked to where we finally saw the white blaze for the AT. Then we turned left on the trail and finally reached Wintry Shelter. We had to turn around and head back because we needed to drive home today.